Welcome to the Cottage Chronicles, a podcast for writers, readers, and creatives.
Hello and welcome back to the Cottage Chronicles. Today I want to talk about the book high. This is the best part of writing. It is the high that you get from coming up with the idea of the book, writing the book, the process. And it's just like when you work out. You get that high, that they call it the runner's high, from working out, going on a run. The endorphins kick in, your body feels good, your mind feels happy from those endorphins. Well, there is 3 stages to writing that also offer the book high. And I wanted to talk a little bit about those today. Very simply, as I record this, I am in the final stages of publishing for my 4th book. And so I've had 4 rounds of this now and have recognized where these highs hit. And of course, with every high, there comes lows as well. The very first high for me always comes with the book idea. It comes when I have thought of this really great idea. Either it's for the ending of a book, or I see the scene in my mind and I get so excited about it. Or sometimes it's the beginning. I see this very mysterious, exciting, captivating moment that could be the beginning of a story. But whatever it may be, wherever you start in getting the idea for your story, there's usually a really big high as you come up with the idea and as you get started with putting it on paper. For me, as of this point, I've always been a writer who does what they call writing in the dark. I don't outline, I don't scheme my plots, I don't write down all these facts and figures about my characters and their development. I usually start with this idea, which is a point in the book. And then I start to let my imagination work around it. I start to let my imagination just kind of flow as I write. The idea comes, it becomes more of a solid, cemented story than just an idea. And that's how I end up writing my whole novel. Now I am experimenting more with outlining and plotting. And I think we'll see for book number 5. That's how I'm designing the book. That's how I'm planning, and I'm being strategic about it. But for me, writing that first scene is such a high. For Self-Conclusion, my first book, the idea started with the very final scene. So spoiler alert, if you have not read Self-Conclusion and want to, then you might not want to go any further right now. But when writing Self-Conclusion, the idea started with, what if there's a girl who struggled with mental health, and everyone thought she was a little crazy, that she was making things up. But the reality was, she had really seen a fantastical world. She had really been in this magical world that was not Earth as we know it, that was not our planet and our contemporary society. She was taken to this fantastical world, saw these amazing things, and something brought her back to her world. And in my head, it was this final scene where she wakes up in a hospital room and she is told that everything she experienced was in her mind. Now, if you've ever seen Sucker Punch, it's very similar to that movie concept. I hadn't seen that movie before I wrote the book, and someone read my book and said, it sounds a lot like this movie. And I was like, oh, well, I better go watch it. It's similar in ways. I would say mine is less dark and gritty. But that's what the idea came from. That's where my high started, was writing this scene in a hospital room of this girl who'd been through a fantastical adventure. She'd fallen in love. She fell in love. She lost a really good friend. She went through the grief of that. She went through the struggle of, I've been prophesied to save this world. Does she fail or does she succeed? But by the time she wakes up, she's told it's all in her head. And the nurses and doctors talking to her draw the parallels from the real world into what she saw in the fantasy world and explain away what she thought was real. They convince her it was not real. And so that's where my inspiration started. That was my very first high. And so I started writing that scene. The second high, I would argue, always comes when you finish the book, when you have your entire story down on paper or, file, as most people write digitally these days. But I would say that is the second high. It's a very big high. For me, this is usually the biggest high, finishing the whole story. They say about 80% of Americans wish they wrote a book and only about 1% do. I think that this is advice I was given in the very beginning, is that, well, not advice so much as a fact that writing the whole story, finishing your story is the hardest part. I didn't find that to be true. I felt the opposite. I said, finishing the whole story, writing the whole story doesn't seem that hard to me. It's the editing, it's the formatting, it's the, reshaping certain scenes to fit better. That was the struggle for me. I found that to be the hardest part, definitely. But as I've written more and more books, I've learned that while it's still not the hardest part for me to write the whole thing, that is the biggest high. I get the biggest sense of excitement, of adrenaline, of motivation, inspiration when I finish the story. I cannot wait to share it with people. I want to shout it out to the rooftops that I have this book. Everyone should read it. It's amazing. And, it still needs edited and it still needs beta readers to review it. But that is when I have my biggest high. That is when I'm most excited. I remember with Alter, I struggled with the ending. I wasn't sure how to wrap it up. I knew how I wanted it to end, but I didn't know how to get to that final scene from where I was. And it was only a chapter or two away from the ending. I knew that, but I just didn't know how to transition into it. And so for me, finishing that book was a huge high. I was like, finally, I solved the riddle. I finished the puzzle of how to get to the end. And so that was a huge high for me. In that story, I did not write the ending first. I wrote all my favorite scenes first throughout the story. I had that book in my head kind of mapped out of what I wanted to happen, what the main sequences were. So I wrote those out and then I filled it in. And so when I finally figured out how to do the fill in between this big scene and then the final scene, oh, it just felt right. And I was so excited. I was so happy that I finally got it done. And then the third high, the biggest moment that escalated, again, endorphin rush, that moment where you're just so excited. You have the adrenaline, you're feeling motivated and inspired. You're like, yes, I did it. Want to scream it, want to let everyone know from mountaintops. That third high is definitely when you publish it, when it goes up for sale, when it's live, when you tell people, get your book, come order your book. That is such an amazing feeling. I love it. I love that feeling. And I think that's what motivates me to keep writing, is all these different highs, especially the second and third highs. But that third high is just, it makes you feel so proud. It really does. You feel so proud of yourself, and that's okay. It's okay to feel proud of yourself. You feel like, you can do it again because you just did it once. You have this new stepping stone of, okay, I've accomplished this. It's time to up my game. It's time to do it again. So those are my three big highs. Number one, when you first come up with your book idea and start putting pen to paper, when you first start writing that scene that just sparked inspiration inside of you. Number two is when you finish your book, when it's all down out of your head, into your file, into your notebook, and you have a complete and finished story. And number three is when you finally get to publish the book. Those are the three amazing highs. I hope that you all get to experience them. I certainly have. I've experienced them 4 times now, those highs, and it's amazing. It's a great feeling. If you are part of the 80% of Americans who want to write a book, do it. And of course, you might say, oh, TK, it is not that easy. I know it's not that easy. I've done it 4 times. It is hard. I'm going to have another podcast talking about the lows that you experience writing a book, but 1% do. You could be, or maybe it's less than 1%, but you could be part of that 1%. And won't you feel so proud? Won't you be so happy that you did it? Whether it be a nonfiction or fiction, whether it be a short story or an article, a lot of people have stories to tell and they're afraid. They're afraid that maybe I'm not a good writer. They're afraid that maybe my skills aren't up to par. Don't be afraid. Go write your story, experience those highs.
Thank you for listening to the Cottage Chronicles. If you're interested in references or resources mentioned in this podcast, or have questions for the host or have interest in being a guest, please visit tkjohnsonbooks.com.